Welcome back to the series of videos on data engineering. In our last video, we saw how we created a machine learning pipeline and submitted it as a job and executed the pipeline and also evaluated the results. Now, assume that this model is satisfactory. The next stage is to make this model available to the end user for their work, which means that the example that we are talking about, uh, an end user, let's say maybe a banker or somebody who wants to predict the income of an individual to be greater than 50K or less than 50K, will input all the attributes and then he or she will get an output that will say that whether the income of the person is more than 50K or less than 50K. Remember that this time we do not have any training or test data sets to evaluate whether the prediction is right or wrong, because this prediction is now the actual prediction that you want to do. You are no longer training or testing the model. Now, if you look at it, there are several components and missing links that we need to have. First is that we need to provide a interface for input and output to the user. Right now, when you're building a model, there is no such interface. The interface is only for the data scientists, but there's no end user interface. End user interface will look like a website or an app where the end user will either upload the, let's say, a set of information about people as far as their attributes are concerned, and or will manually enter it, and it will he or she will get the output. So we need that interface. But the next thing, that interface needs to get this data of all the features and run it through a model. Now, the model that we have is sitting in a development environment, and it cannot, in general, take an input from an external interface. So what we need to do is we need to package the model into an executable file, because as far as the user is concerned, they don't need the final model. It's just an executable file. It's like, you can compare this with, let's say, when you install Microsoft Office in your computer, what happens? Microsoft has developed the Microsoft Office and given you an executable file which you have downloaded from Microsoft site, and you run that executable file, and that's the Microsoft Office has got installed. Similarly, you need an executable file, and this executable file should do exactly the same thing as the trained model is doing. For example, it should make the input data pass the same transformation. For example, if there are missing values, it should do the same treatment to the missing values as the model has done. If we have done some other kind of transformation like outlier detection, or let's say collinearity, and we have removed some of the features, or we have created an artificial feature through something called principal component analysis, or feature mm, engineering, or let's say we have normalized the data. In case of logistic regression, you need to normalize the data. All this pre-processing should do exactly the same way as it is done during training, and then it should pass through the model. Now, what is a model? A model is either an equation. So if it's a logistic regression, it will be an equation, or if it's a decision tree, it will be some kind of an if-else statement. So it has to go through the same equation or same if-else statement to give you the output. So that means this entire model that you have built, that has to be packaged into a executable file, and we have to put that in another environment. Environment means a separate hardware and a software and an operating system, etc. Why? Because I don't want to disturb the development environment, because in the development environment there will be some work that is happening. So this has to be completely in a different environment, and that environment is usually called the endpoints. And this transportation has to happen in a seamless manner, so that the model remains intact. So once I transport this, I need to build a connection between the web interface and the endpoint where this model is deployed. And this connection is done through a web service. And this web service will pass on the data to this endpoint, and this endpoint will run through the prediction pass on the prediction to the web service, and web service will take it back to the website, web or the app interface. Now, in this particular video, we are not going to look at developing the website and building the web services, because usually that is taken care of by the web developer. But as a data scientist, our job is to, or data engineer, our job is to package this model and transfer it to an endpoint which will be accessed by this web service. So this is what we are going to do in this particular exercise. So let's see how this can be done. So we have to go to the job which has run the entire pipeline. So we get to the job. So this is the full job. And when the job is open, you will see there are 3 dots over here, and there's something called inference pipeline. The inference pipeline means there's a job is going to create a new pipeline which needs to be run for the purpose of production. Now, why there's a new pipeline that is needed? For example, this new pipeline is required. There are certain activities that will happen in the as far as cleaning missing data is concerned. So the new pipeline should contain the package or the executable file that will do exactly the same work. Similarly, the new pipeline should contain a package version of the final model, which is basically an equation or an if-else statement, if-else kind of branch, like in this case, a region tree. And this pipeline will be created automatically, which will take input from the web interface and will give output to the web service, rather, not web interface, the web service. The web service will then talk to the web interface. So this can be a real-time inference or a batch inference. The real-time inference can take real-time data, batch inference can take batch data. So let us look at the real-time inference pipeline. So now once we click on this, see something is happening, and automatically this pipeline is being rebuilt, and a new pipeline is created, which is called real-time inference. And see, there are some changes we can observe here. What has happened is that there is a web service input and there's a web service output. So the input from where the data will come from the input application which a user is using, either a website or an app. And once the prediction is done, it will move to the web interface, which will take the data to the website or app. Okay. And in between, what is happening? In between, you see that this is TD prediction complete pipeline. So this is so this is coming from the original pipeline, which will apply the transformation that was applied on the data in the pipeline. So in the pipeline, if we normalize the data, same normalization will apply over here. And what is this? This is the model. The equation or the if-else statement, the same model will be applied to the data that is coming. Now here you can see an evaluate model, but this evaluate model is irrelevant here because there's nothing you can evaluate against, okay, because you don't know the real income. Okay, that's the whole purpose. Right now you're doing a prediction. Now, why do you have this data set over here? Because there's nothing, this data set doesn't have any role apparently, because your data is coming from the web interface of the real data. This is a past data on which you're modeling the model. You are not going to use this data for actual prediction. Now, this data set is used only to get the schema of the data, so that when the data comes from the web interface, it can, because the web interface of the web service will not necessarily send the data in a structured format. It will typically send the data in a JSON format. And you need to then apply the schema on that data set. Where do you get the schema? To get the schema, it uses this. So this is the production pipeline that has been built, which is derived from the development pipeline. Now, this pipeline has to be first run before it can be deployed to the endpoint. So we'll do the same thing here. We'll configure and submit, but this time this is not the development pipeline. This is a production pipeline which is running. We can use the same experiment because it's a part of the same job, but the display job name, or you can here also say experiment deployment, so that we understand. No, this is the existing experiment, sorry. And this name we can give prediction complete pipeline real-time inference, so that we understand that this is a different job compared to the previous job. Okay, go to next. Again, you have to take the compute instance. That doesn't change, and we have to submit. Now, this is a new production job that has been created, which will run this whole process again. Okay. So if you go to jobs now, I should see another job. See, this is the older job. Submitted now. See, this new job has been created. This job is for the production. So you go over here, you will see the pipeline is the production pipeline. You see the web service input and web service output. Otherwise, it looks similar. It will go through the same process. Okay. It will run all these nodes. Score model, which is the final prediction. Okay, so now you have, it has run the production pipeline. This evaluate model, it is running, but it is irrelevant here, and it's a superfluous thing. It will not be able to evaluate anything. We could have also deleted it, but I've left it as is. Doing the last step, though the last step is not relevant in this particular case, but we'll let it run. Okay. Now there's run. You notice that this deploy button, which was inactive, has now become active. Now this entire model will be deployed to the endpoint from where the web developer has to pick up. So usually the data engineers or data scientists work ends after deployment, where the web developer uses that model to interface with a web application. So we'll deploy this. So we don't have any endpoint name, so we will call this income prediction endpoint. Again, as I mentioned that these days, mostly it will, organization will deploy it in a Kubernetes clusters, which is Docker containers, so that the deployment is faster and it is in the contained environment. But we do not, we can't, okay, this is a lowercase letter it's asking, so we'll give lowercase letter. So we cannot create a case compute instance. Instead, we'll use a container instance. Okay, because in the student account, you cannot create a Kubernetes instance. Okay, and we'll deploy this. So let us see what happens when the deployment is done. First of all, if you go to this model tab, you will see the model over here. Now, what is this model? This model is actually nothing but a packaged executable file. We typically call it a pickle file of the equation or the if-else condition that has emerged out of the model training. So that is lying over here. And now this model becomes portable because it can be used in taken to any environment. It's like installing an executable file of MS Office in any computer. So once Microsoft makes an executable file, it can be installed in any computer. Okay, it's no longer dependent on the environment where the development has happened. So same is here. This model can be taken to any environment. And then this model is deployed in a particular environment, which is called the endpoint. So this is the endpoint. Okay. And if you go inside the endpoint, you can actually test the endpoint. So you see the endpoint is getting loaded. Now, in most of the cases, you see that there is an unhealthy status because the student environment is not suitable to support the endpoint in many cases. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. If it works, then you will be able to even test the endpoint through by giving basic inputs to a very basic web interface or very basic interface. But that's again not really a job of a data engineer or data scientist. That's typically the job of a web developer or a web application guy whose job is to create the front-end application, create the web services, and link it with the end. Okay, so this is where the deployment ends. So we have seen in the entire series of videos that how we took a inbuilt sample dataset and we created a model pipeline using Machine Learning Studio, how we executed the pipeline, how we evaluated the model using various parameters, and then finally, how did we deploy the model to an endpoint.